The Las Vegas Raiders have not been overly active in that free agency period up to this point, but I would make the argument they've done all the smart things that you want to kind of do. You don't want to pay a guy $25 million to bring him in. You want to try to get guys with high upside, right? You want to bring in Jeremy Chin for $7.5, $8 million. You want to bring in guys like Alex Kappa. It's a 1-year contract. Maybe he kind of flips it and gets back to his former Pro Bowl self. And you also want to try to bring in Robert Spillane and Clavon Chason, right? Guys you can pay $4, $5, $6 million to that could end up playing as a top 10 to 12 player at their position. And the Raiders actually hosted a linebacker yesterday. That is Christian Ellis in for a visit, who has huge upside for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I want to talk about this. So Aaron Wilson, very solid insider, put it out there that the Raiders hosted Christian Ellis for a visit. This is a guy that has tremendous upside. And this is a guy that if he comes into the Raiders, I think he'd be our best linebacker pretty much on day one. And I know a lot of people don't know this guy. And I know a lot of people have no idea who the hell this guy is. But I want to just kind of take you through his story really quickly and talk about why the Patriots actually don't want to allow this guy to leave. But his market could be north of $4 to $5 million. So Christian Ellis was a UDFA, right? He did not get drafted. He kind of went under the radar. Initially, I think he signed with the Vikings. He had stints with teams like the Niners. He came back, I believe, with the Vikings a second time. He was with the Eagles for a little bit as well. So this guy's kind of been around. And it really hasn't been all that good, right? He's kind of been a practice squad player. He has had upside, which is why so many different teams have given this guy an opportunity. And last year, he got paired with the perfect coach for him. He got paired with an all-pro linebacker as his head coach, Jared Mayo. Most of you guys know who that is. He was the Patriots head coach last year. And while he became the head coach, Christian Ellis went over there, and this guy broke out, right? He broke out where he had over 80 tackles. He had an interception, got his hands on the ball multiple times. The guy was productive as hell for the New England Patriots this past season. And this guy has legit upside to be a top 10 to 12 linebacker in the NFL, right? Keep in mind, linebacker is a weird position, right? It's very, very rare. You get guys like Patrick Willis or Fred Warner who are just dominant players for many, many years. Oftentimes, you get guys that have 5 or 6 really, really good years, and then they kind of fall off after that. We've seen guys like Robert Spillane, right? Was kind of average with Steelers, had upside, had potential, came to the Raiders, had a couple of really good productive years, ends up getting paid. We'll see how he kind of does as kind of goes forward. But for the Raiders, they're now bringing in a guy in Christian Ellis, and I should say, it's just a visit at this point. The guy has not officially signed. He's already had a visit with the Carolina Panthers. He'll probably have another 1 or 2 visits as he kind of goes forward. This guy has upside, right? Specifically, he has upside as a cover linebacker. Very fluid, very rangy. I think his best football is still obviously in front of him. And also, I should kind of throw this out there. So the Patriots actually tendered this guy. They gave him what is called a right of first refusal tender. So Christian Ellis was obviously going to become a free agent, and the Patriots did not want this guy to walk. They tried negotiating with him. They weren't able to come to a conclusion on the dollar amount. And because they essentially tagged him with this right here, what this means is he can go out there, he can negotiate a contract. If the Raiders say we'll give you $6 million a year, the Patriots can basically match that, right? So the Patriots will have the opportunity to match whatever contract he ends up getting. I think he has until April 18 or 19 to sign that contract with any other team. And then the Patriots at that point have 72 hours to basically match it. Right. Now, the Patriots have already signed some linebackers as well, so there's a chance Christian Ellis is going to be a guy they kind of just end up letting go. I think for the Patriots, the best case scenario was that when they gave him that tag, they wanted to pay him that $3.25 million, right? So you tag a guy, they get $3.25 million for that year. And for the Patriots, they're okay with paying this guy $3.25, right? They think that his best football is obviously in front of him. Maybe he develops a little bit this year. And that money for 1 year could be worth it, and then they might be able to extend him if he continues to have success. But again, a team like the Raiders could easily jump in at this point and say, hey, we'll give you $5 or $6 million for the next 2 to 3 years, right? Maybe you guarantee him $12 million over the next 2 years, and then it's a third-year team option, right? I think for the Raiders, that could be a really, really, really solid contract for a guy who has absolutely flashed. It's a guy that has upside. And it's a guy that's going to have multiple options as well, right? The Panthers have already hosted this guy. The Raiders have already now hosted him. We haven't officially signed him. My hope is that within the next 2 or 3 days, the Raiders get it actually done. Potential is absolutely there with this guy. Huge upside. And I should also just kind of throw this out there. You know, the Raiders brought in Robert Spillane, and we didn't pay him a whole lot of money. We brought him in for on the cheaper side, and he well outperformed that contract. I think one of the things John Spytek and Pete Carroll have done a good job with is they've signed those type of players, right? I know, you know, not Robert Spillane necessarily, but like this year specifically, these guys have brought in those type of players, guys that have upside, right? Always sign upside in free agency. You never want to pay top dollar for guys because oftentimes you're paying for past production and not future production. It's rare you're going to be able to sign a guy and have him actually have success going forward, right? We've had examples for the Raiders, right? Like Antonio Brown was an example, although I think we traded for him technically, and it never really worked out. But even if he played for the Raiders, like his best football was already behind him. He never ended up having the same type of success going forward, even as he went to the Buccaneers. You look at a guy like Corey Littleton that the Raiders paid like $14 million to per year. It was a ridiculous contract looking back at it. Oftentimes those type of things don't work out. Even Christian Wilkins, right? We paid Christian Wilkins based off what he did in the past. Now, luckily for us, Wilkins is still a good football player, and this was his first non-rookie contract, right? So we got him in year 6. We'll have him in year 7, 8, and then potentially 9. And, you know, that's an okay contract, but generally speaking, those type of things don't work. You do want to bring in guys like Christian Ellis, right? Potential upsides there as well. Another guy that the Raiders actually did just bring back yesterday, I want to just quickly touch on this. We have a couple other things I want to get into. Darnay Holmes is re-signing with the Raiders on a 1-year contract. The Raiders brought in Darnay Holmes, I believe it was last year. I don't think it was during the season. I think it was during training camp. We brought him over to the Raiders. It may have been in preseason, but we brought this guy in, and he played a lot for the Raiders this past season, right? Not a whole lot, but he played for the Raiders, right? And he's a guy with some upside. He's a guy with some potential. We'll see how he actually translates into, you know, being with the Raiders for the entire offseason. Now he knows the Patrick Graham scheme fully. And I should also just kind of throw this out there. Patrick Graham did not have to bring back Darnay Holmes. He could have went out and said, hey, there's these other 6 cornerbacks that I'd rather have. Let's bring in one of these other guys. But Patrick Graham obviously believes that I want to have guys that were here last year that understand the scheme and system. And I want to keep those guys and continue to mold them into what I kind of want out of my corners. And don't overlook the fact that Patrick Graham runs a really solid scheme, right? Never overlook that fact. Darnay Holmes is coming back to the Raiders. We'll see what he has, right? He's not a guy that I think has top 10 potential, but maybe he could be a good solid role player and contribute on special teams. There's 2 more updates I want to kind of get into. Both are regarding wide receivers. So obviously the Raiders need a wide receiver. Everybody knows that at this point. It's not a secret. The Raiders need to get a true number 1 or a true X wide receiver. They're not the same thing, right? Do we need a true number 1 wide receiver? Probably not, right? We have Brock Bowers. He's like the number 1 option through the receivers. But we need an X wide receiver, right? We need a guy that's tall, guy that could do the, you know, can out jump people, has good jump back technique. We need a guy that's lengthy and can beat double coverage as well and make those tough catches in the middle of the field. And Tetairoa McMillan apparently ran a 4.48 40-yard dash. This is according to Jordan Schultz. He put it out there saying that there's multiple scouts that had told him. At least one scout said he ran a 4.48, but a lot of other scouts had him around that same mark. And to me, that's absolutely crazy because the Raiders need a wide receiver. They need exactly what McMillan is, and they might have a real shot to get this guy with the 6th overall pick. McMillan, to me, has a ton of upside, a ton of potential. I understand some people do say that, hey, he's not as quick and as explosive as some other wide receivers, but we got to realize this guy's massive. Now, the tweet here says he's 6'5", 215. That's wrong. I asked Grok the official numbers. He's actually 6'0", that's the official combine numbers, which means he's 6 feet 4 inches and 1/8 of an inch. And then he weighed in at 219 pounds. To me, this guy is going to be a very good football player, right? Especially if he gets paired up with a good quarterback, a good scheme system, which the Raiders obviously have at this point. McMillan's an absolute real target, if you guys ask me, for the Raiders. You know, I want the Raiders to fix this offensive line. I really do. But I also want the Raiders to get that X wide receiver, and I also want them to get a running back And I think you could probably get that in the first and second round of the draft this year. And truth be told, you can probably even follow it up with a starting caliber guard in the third round. If I'm the Raiders, you can get a starting caliber wide receiver, a starting caliber running back, and a starting caliber guard in the first 3 rounds, right? And the Raiders would be absolutely set to compete as they get into this season, right? If that's what they're able to kind of bring in. But it is still kind of crazy that this guy was, ran a 4.48. Now, I'll be the first to tell you guys, if he was this fast and he was this quick, I would have preferred that he ran at the combine. Now, I don't know if there's anything out there, like maybe he was hurt or whatever. But the fact that at his pro day he ran this, keep in mind those are hand timers. It's not laser timed, right? Which is obviously going to be different. At the combine, they use lasers, which can be a lot more accurate. But again, I don't think you're really going to be able to tell the difference between a guy that runs a 4.48 and a 4.55. I think this just kind of checks the box that this guy has that speed and quickness to be able to get it done at the next level. Tetairoa McMillan's definitely a guy that I'm considering for the Raiders with that 6th overall pick. Some people have said his stock has been falling. Some people think that he'll be a 2nd round pick. I would never disagree with certain reports, especially from certain credible people. But I would be shocked if he's not a 1st round pick. For me, Travis Hunter's the best wide receiver in this class. It's not close. It's not close. Travis Hunter's the best playmaker overall. I'd say even over Ashton Dente. Travis Hunter's going to be a better offensive playmaker, at least in my opinion. It's probably pretty close. But, Tetairoa McMillan does not come close to Travis Hunter, in my opinion. They are different, right? McMillan's going to be that true X. Hunter's going to be a little bit different. But it will be interesting. We'll see what ends up happening as that draft kind of comes around. And then, of course, speaking of wide receivers, George Pickens, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers, posted an image of him and Tom Brady standing next to one another. And, of course, this could mean absolutely nothing, right? This could just mean, hey, I'm giving a shout out to Tom Brady. Maybe this was at some sort of pro day that was happening that George Pickens was probably, potentially a part of. Maybe this was the Georgia Pro Day. Who knows, right? But the fact that he took this picture, he posted this picture, could also mean that there's a chance this guy is on the trade block and the Steelers may be looking to trade him. The Steelers already have a ton of contracts that they've kind of paid out. They have to figure out who they're going to keep, who they're not going to keep. George Pickens, one of those guys that, he's going to want $30 million himself. And George Pickens is talented as hell. I don't care what anybody says. This guy's one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. Now, he's not the smartest wide receiver in my opinion, but he is talented as hell. And if he has a consistent quarterback, the guy's a good football player no matter how you look at it. But the Steelers have already brought in DK Metcalf, and they paid DK Metcalf. And they already have guys under contract like TJ Watt. They paid Alex Highsmith, who's on the opposite side of TJ Watt. And they also have offensive linemen that are going to be due contracts, right? They have Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, Trey Fatanu, right? 3 guys on rookie contracts who are going to need to get paid in the next 2 to 3 years. They might not have money for George Pickens at this point. So for the Raiders, does it make sense to potentially trade for a guy like George Pickens? I do think Pickens would probably go for a 2nd round pick, if not a 1st round pick. And if the Raiders wanted to bring him in, I would consider it 100%. I think he's talented. His best football is still in front of him. And the fact that he's taking a picture of Tom Brady, it probably doesn't mean anything, truth be told. But I would love for the Raiders to be able to bring in Pickens. Now, I wouldn't trade a 1st round pick this year, right? The 6th overall pick is much more valuable than a guy like Pickens. But our 1st round pick next year is going to be in the bottom 15 picks, right? So you could consider next year's 1st round pick. I'd be okay with that if the Raiders felt the same way. I'm excited for the future of the Raiders, man. I know some people will not agree with me because I read all the comments, so I always see it. I know some people are not going to agree with me, but this is the best direction that the Raiders have been on for a number of years, right? Geno Smith is a good quarterback. He can get it done. And more than just Geno Smith being a good quarterback and the ability to get it done, the Raiders have a good coaching staff in place. We have a legit direction. We have a good defense. We have actual legit defensive players. The Raiders are on a really, really good path in my opinion, but they just got to figure out like 1 or 2 pieces. I think, shoring up that wide receiver threat, right? Getting a true number 1 guy out there. Maybe it's McMillan, maybe it's Pickens. Maybe you trade for T. Higgins, right? Actually, I guess T. Higgins technically got a contract. So you wouldn't trade for him at this point. But, you get that true X wide receiver. You add a running back, and it doesn't have to be Ashton Jeanty. You know, I love Ashton Jeanty. He's the best running back in this class, but I don't think it's that much of a difference for an NFL offense, right? Unless you're the Philadelphia Eagles, where you have the #1 offensive line. You know, if you're the Raiders, who has like the 15th best offensive line, there's not going to be a big difference between Ashton Jeanty and Caleb Johnson or RJ Harvey, right? Or Marion Hampton, right? There's not going to be a huge difference for you because your offensive line's not going to dominate people, right? And you're going to be trying to figure out ways to get these guys to football in space and potentially create those opportunities. Maybe it's Colton Miller or Paris Johnson that are able to reach and overtake a block. To me, you know, getting a wide receiver, getting a running back, and then getting a guard as well that can play, you know, opposite of Kappa or Parham, whichever guy ends up starting. Getting a guard the opposite side of that, a true difference maker, can make a huge difference as well. So we'll see what ends up happening. Love where the Raiders are right now. Love the direction we're kind of headed. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know down in the comments below. I obviously don't feel good at all today. But hit that thumbs up button, man. Subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.